Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar to write a successful abstract for the 2018 ICFP. We are really excited to have you all joining us today. And please ask everyone to mute yourselves. Everyone should be muted except our speakers today, who know who they are. So we're going to get started right now. So I'm Marianne Amos. I'm the project lead for 120 Under 40. And I'd again like to welcome everyone to this morning or this afternoon's webinar, depending on where you are. This webinar is co-hosted by 120 Under 40 and IYAFP. And we wanted to note that this is not an official ICFP sponsored webinar. So this is just a special service that 120 Under 40 and IYAFP are offering to junior researchers and youth in the family planning community to help you all better prepare abstracts for the conference. Youth are really an integral part of the ICFP and the family planning community. And over the last few conferences, we've seen youth become more and more involved in the conference. And so we really look forward this year to see youth play an even larger role at this year's conference. So just a reminder to everyone to please mute and please do not turn on your video screen. There's no need to share video during this webinar. We also wanted to note that attending this webinar is not a guarantee that your abstract will be accepted. This certainly will help you prepare a successful abstract, but it doesn't mean that just because you attend this webinar that your abstract will be accepted to the conference. So just a quick overview of how we're going to format this webinar. Basically, we're going to walk through each section of an abstract. Members of our team will be sharing tips and techniques for how to handle each section of each kind of abstract. So you'll get a great overview of how to write each section of any of the three kinds of abstracts that are being accepted this year. We are taking questions, but only through the chat box. There's a section on the side of your screen where it says chat, and you can type questions in that box. We will be compiling those questions during the webinar, and we'll be reading them out at the end of the webinar. So we'll get to all of your questions, or as many of them as we can, at the end. And we will be posting the recording of this webinar on the 120 Under 40 website at 120under40.org/resources, and IYAFP will be sharing it as well. And now I'd like to introduce Jean-Christophe Rusatira, who is the Director of Research and Development at IYAFP and is a 2016 120 Under 40 winner. And he'll be giving us an introduction to the conference and to abstracts.
Hi, everyone. As Marianne mentioned, I'm Jean-Christophe, and I'm Director of Research and Development of the International Youth Alliance for Family Planning that is hosting this webinar. So I'm going to take you through some sections of this webinar, and my fellow colleagues will continue with other sections. And I will talk again on the conclusion parts, and we'll continue from there. So as a history of the International Conference on Family Planning, this conference was initiated in 2009, and it's the largest scientific conference on family planning currently. And the goal of this conference is basically to disseminate knowledge, celebrate successes, and identify next steps in family planning, research, and program implementation. So over the past conferences, we've had quite a good number of abstract submissions. And this table gives you an overview of the abstracts that were submitted in each year and what was accepted. So in 2009, there were 613 abstracts submitted and 43 performed panels submitted. And of those, 297 abstracts were accepted and 25 performed panels were accepted. So this number increased to 1,925 abstract submissions in 2016, and of those, 970 abstracts were accepted. So these abstracts that are accepted include abstracts that are accepted for oral presentations and those that are accepted for uh, panel presentations. So this gives you an idea of how competitive conference can be and how good your abstract has to be in order to be accepted for presentation. So in this slide, I'm going to give you an overview about the structure of the abstracts. This year, the International Conference on Family Planning will be accepting three types of abstracts. Uh, Before, they used to accept only research abstracts. Then it was expanded to include program and best practices. And now they've expanded to include also advocacy and accountability. So as you can see on this slide, the research abstracts and the program abstracts and the advocacy and accountability abstracts have almost the same structure, but the components are different. So you may realize that the significance and background part may look similar, but other parts are quite different. So you have to pay attention on those specific sections and see the differences and actually decide on where your abstract fits best. And I would also like to mention that if a study is undergoing and you only have preliminary results, you can still present it. You can still submit your abstracts for ICFP 2018. And this is only if you have key findings that you want to share. So I would like to take you through the abstract evaluation criteria, and the abstracts are scored based on four criteria, and these criteria would be weighed, and each abstract is reviewed by three reviewers, and from the scores from those three reviewers, the system calculates an average, and based on that average, that's where they will decide which abstract is accepted for presentation, for oral presentations, which ones go for poster presentations, and of course, which ones don't qualify for presentation to the conference. So they will look at the originality, the quality of the abstract, and the importance in the presentation. So these are the main four criteria that are followed, and there will be special consideration for junior researchers under 35. And this is not about the quality of the study itself or the abstract. This will only be given attention when deciding for travel scholarships, but the abstracts will not be scored any different. So the criteria will be the same. The reviewers may be the same based on the tracks, and later we give links where to find the tracks. But this will only be for the scholarships. It won't be for scoring the abstracts.
Thank you, Chris. And now we're going to move to the significance background section of the abstract. This section was put together by Jenny Amadi, Alan Kabagenyi, and Aisha Wazari, and Alan is going to present it. Alan?
Alan, are you with us? Alan?
Okay. Hello.
Alan, are you with us?
Do we have Alan, Jenny, or Aisha on the call?
You may be having an issue with connectivity. You may be having an issue with connectivity. I will take it on and we see if Alan is able to join us. So as you've seen, based on the type of abstracts, abstracts we have three types of abstracts: the research, the program, and advocacy. And one most common section on all of the abstracts is the significance and background. But the content of this section may differ a little, but they may not really differ much because they don't really, the content is not very different based on the type of abstract. So here, what you want to talk about is what is known about the topic, and you need to provide some statistics where possible. Could it be at the global, regional, or national level? You also need to describe the key literature and show the existing gaps. And you need to describe in detail the contribution relevance of your study or the program that you want to implement, or the advocacy intervention that you want to conduct. And you also need to demonstrate how your study or your program or your intervention could provide possible solutions to the existing problems. So you also need to show or indicate the beneficiary groups or individuals of the study findings. So basically, you can, for example, say 13 to 19 years old. And here we encourage people to really be very focused. So not to say I want to focus on a population in this country or a youth in this specific region, rather be defined in a matter of age and location, and possibly if there is any specific sub of the population that you want to target, you also need to mention that. So for example, here you can see an example that was given. So contraceptive use after birth is critical in determining maternal and child health. So here you are talking about the importance of the issue. However, hardly any documented evidence has assessed the predictors of time to contraceptive use after resumption of sexual intercourse among women in Uganda. So here you can easily tell that the group is women who have given birth maybe over the past few weeks, and this is in Uganda. And there is one specific problem that you want to look at. So this is a very clear in matter of population, in matter of intervention that you want to do, in matter of the problem that you want to study.
Thank you, Chris. And now we're going to move to the main question / activity tested section. That team was Adebisi, Adenipekun, Liz Futrell, and Barwani Msiska. And Liz Futrell is going to give the presentation.
Hi, everybody. This is Liz Futrell with the Knowledge for Health project at the Johns Hopkins Center for Communication Programs. I'm the content development lead and a program officer for K for Health, and also the co-founder of Family Planning Voices. And I'll take you through some key considerations as you're developing the main question section of your abstract. Hi.
Slide.
So if you're developing a research abstract with your main question, you want to pose the question that the rest of your study will set out to answer. So what problem were you trying to address with your research, or what gap in knowledge does your study fill? So a couple of examples of main questions for a research abstract. You can see on this slide, we have a qualitative example, or an example of a main question from a qualitative study, which would be something like, how do providers' perceptions of long-acting reversible contraception influence their recommendation of immediate postpartum LARCs to their patients in Georgia in the USA? An example of a quantitative main question would be something like, do providers who use the DMPA reinjection job aid turn away fewer clients for reinjection than those who do not use the job aid? So basically, you're asking the question that you'll answer later in the abstract in your results section. The main question can also take the form of a hypothesis, and a research hypothesis is a predictive statement that your study will either validate or invalidate. So again, we have an example of a research question, which would be, do young people have less access to contraception than older adults? If you wanted to pose that as a null hypothesis, you would say, age has no effect on access to contraception. And then your study would either prove or disprove that null hypothesis. If you wanted to pose the hypothesis as an alternative hypothesis, you're basically saying that there is an effect. So you might say something like, the younger a person is, the harder it is for them to access contraception. And then again, your study would either prove or disprove that statement. If you're developing an abstract focused on a program or an advocacy effort, then you'll describe, rather than posing a main question, you'll describe the activity that you tested in your study. So if you're doing an advocacy or program abstract, you want to make sure that as you describe your activity, you are clear and concise. You want to try to answer the 5 W's and 1 H. So as you describe your program, you want to make sure that you've answered the questions who, what, when, where, why, and how. Again, you want to make sure that you're answering the question, what gap or problem did you try to address with this program or with this advocacy effort? Make sure that your goal, the goal of the activity or the effort was clear. And then just make sure that something stands out about your particular approach. So what's different or unique about your particular activity? So just a few tips to keep in mind as you write the main question section of your abstract. I think one really important tip is to keep it simple and succinct. You have 100 words in which to write your main question or your activity description. So that's not a lot of space. And within those 100 words, you have to make sure that the people who will be reviewing your abstract understand the population you were working with, the context you were working in, the time frame your study or your activity took place within. You have to make sure that you're not making the assumption that the people who are reading your abstract understand your context. So make sure they have enough information to really understand, the conditions in which you were operating. The reviewers have to understand the scope and the scale of your study or your program, the key components of your approach. And then, of course, you want to make it clear what's the importance or the relevance of your study or your activity to the field. So what new knowledge or insights is your work contributing?
Thank you. Oh, go back. Thank you so much, Liz. And now we're going to talk about the methodology section. I don't believe that Alan has been able to join, so perhaps Chris, you would be able to present this as well.
Alan, are you with us now? Alan? Okay, so the methodology section, this is really where these 3 types of abstracts differ. And I would like you to pay much attention on this section because this is what we call so this is what we call how well your study or maybe how well your program was evaluated, how well your advocacy intervention was conducted. And you have to be very precise and very, very brief and very clear on this section. So here you have to talk about the study design or the design of the program that you are going to implement, but we talk about that after this slide. So you are going to talk about the study design, the location of the study, the data sources that we are going to use, the time frame, the sample size, and the analysis approach. And here I would like to tell you that there may be quantitative studies that probably that's where you want the representative, your data to be representative, but you don't necessarily have to have very large studies, especially for this type of conference. You also can have a very small study as long as you have very pertinent findings that you want to share. So you don't have to find a very large population, whether it's quantitative or whether it's qualitative, as long as you have very pertinent findings that you want to share. So for the program and best practices type of abstracts, as well as advocacy, they may not differ much in this section, but you want to describe the settings of the study or the intervention or the program that you implemented. Then you also need to describe the data sources. Was it from the evaluation of the program? Was it from already the existing data? So that's what would be like the secondary analysis. Was it the data that you collected on your own? That would be like the primary data analysis that you are going to conduct. And what was the time frame? Was it a needs assessment? Was it an implementation research that you did? Was it an evaluation that you conducted? So you need to describe that so that people may understand when were those data collected. And you also need to describe the intended beneficiaries, the target population, the participant size, selection procedures, and number of treatments. So this is only possibly for where you provide some treatments, but treatment here may mean also another type of intervention. Is it something that, for example, is it an education program that you conducted for one group that you do not administer in the other group? So that's also a treatment. It doesn't have necessarily to be a pharmaceutical or any clinical type of treatment. So here you also need to make sure you describe the intended decision makers, especially for programs and advocacy type of abstracts, because here you want to also describe the approach that you've used to reach those decision makers and the analysis approach of how you analyze your data. This is really to help people to understand how accurate is your analysis and the interpretation of the data you had. So the example given here for a methodology for research abstracts was provided here. And I'll give you 1 minute to read through and then we'll continue. So I can read for those who are calling in using their mobile phones. So here we have this statement or this methodology section for a research abstract that says, data are accrued from survey round 1 April that were collected between April 29 and June 26, 2014 of national representative sample in performance monitoring and accountability PMA 2020 project. Interviews were conducted in 110 enumeration areas in 76 districts in Uganda on family planning indicators through standard DHS questions, including current and ever used of family planning methods. Well-trained resident female interviewers collected data using smartphone mobiles with questionnaires programmed using Open Data Kit ODK software. Primary outcome was modern contraceptive use in the postpartum period. Estimated the prevalence of use using the modified Poisson regression model to obtain prevalence risk ratio with their 95% confidence intervals as measured of association. So this is a very well and clear and precise abstract methodology for a research type of abstract.
Thank you very much, Chris. And now to go through the results and key findings section, we will have Elizabeth Futrell to present again. Thank you, Liz.
Hi again, everybody. So the main thing to keep in mind as you develop your results section of your abstract where you share your key findings is that what you really want to be doing here is answering the main question that we talked about a few minutes ago. So describe the relevant results of your data analysis or of the impact of the program intervention. You have about 250 words with which you can flesh out your results in this section. So when you're thinking about what information to include here, you really want to consider your audience. Are you speaking to implementers, researchers, donors, somebody else? Think about what they in particular would be interested in knowing about your study or your program. And also keep in mind, what do they already know that you don't necessarily have to include in the abstract? So with the information that you do decide to include, you want to be as specific and detailed as possible in the space that you've allowed. So a couple of things to keep in mind. You know, number one, you want to make sure that your findings, again, are answering the main question, that they are either confirming or rejecting the hypothesis your study put forward if you've done a research abstract. And you really don't want to share findings that are not critical or relevant to answering your research question. So again, use your research question as a guide when you're deciding which results to share in your abstract. Also, you want to look back to your background section and just make sure that your results and the findings that you're sharing are grounded in the information and the context that you provided in the background section of your abstract. Another thing to keep in mind is that, you know, you want to be bold, you want to be compelling. So, you know, make sure that you share successes from your program or your research, but it's just as compelling to analyze your failures and talk about maybe what didn't happen and why not. Because what you really want to be sharing is what is new and useful, what knowledge gaps are you filling or has your work filled, what new information can you add to the field. So are there particular trends or relationships that emerged from your results that you might want to emphasize and share? You know, you want to provide your results in a logical sequence. So think about your methodology and think about providing your results in parallel with your methods. But you really want to focus on the, you know, as much as we just talked about analyzing both successes and failures, it's always good to highlight your statistically significant positive results first. And when you do highlight positive associations or significant results, make sure that you also include confidence intervals or p-values that really show the abstract reviewers what your results look like. Any negative associations can be reported at the end of the results section. And if you're reporting qualitative results or program results, just make sure that they're rich with depth and details and nuance that really highlights what's different or what's unique about your findings. At the same time, you know, as you present your findings and results, you're just presenting them. You're not necessarily analyzing them in the results section. So the final section of the abstract is where you can do a little bit more interpretation of what these findings actually mean for the field. So I think we can go to the next slide. So just a couple of results or a couple of examples of results or key findings. So the top example is from a research abstract, and I won't read the whole thing here. You could take a closer look. We'll be sharing the slides with you afterwards. But I think the main thing to emphasize with these research results is that one of the things this results section does is it compares the mean annual rates of pregnancy, birth, and abortion among program participants with the rates of pregnancy, birth, and abortion among the general population. And you can see what stands out about these results is that program participants were only about a fourth as likely to be pregnant, experience a birth or an abortion as people in the general population. So you can really see that the program had a major impact on its participants. If you look at the program abstract example down below, again, you can see that one of the results that the writer has focused on here is the growth in the number of districts over time that was budgeting for family planning. So you can see that the writer reports that in the fiscal year 2007, 26 out of 40 districts budgeted for family planning. A couple of years later, this increased to 33 out of 40 districts. And finally, in 2011, all 49 districts included in the study had budgeted for family planning. So you can see that there's the clear example of change and growth reported in the abstract, and that's really what you want to go for.
Thank you so much, Liz. And now Chris is going to, Chris and Aisha put this section together on knowledge contribution, and Chris will be presenting it.
So in this section, you want to actually conclude, but you want to say, what can we learn from your intervention? Either it's a study, it's a policy advocacy program, it's a program implementation. You want to look at what's the most important take-home message that you want people to have to take home from your study or from your program implementation or your advocacy program. You also want to express this message or listen in a few and precise sentences, and you need to respond to these main three questions. So basically, you want to talk about how do these findings address the problem or gap that you highlighted in the first section. So here, sometimes the issue is that you may ignore the gap that we identified in the first section, and that will be like very bad for your abstract because then it will not look as coherent as it should be. And you also want to highlight the importance. What are the implications of then you have to highlight what are the recommendations and future studies, programs, interventions needed building on your findings or your program. So here I give you an example of an abstract, a section from the abstract that was accepted at the 2016 ICFP. It reads, even with continued declines in fertility, the young population of Rwanda will remain large compared to the working age population of several decades. So this was based on the population structure and the numbers that were found in the analysis. If the demographic dividend is to be realized, Rwanda should continue investing in education, inclusion of women, health, family planning, focus on the youth as potential engine of for economic growth, and develop a strong national employment program that targets large-scale delivery for youth. So this was based on the programs that are already in place and the strategic plan for the country, and also the numbers that you actually see based on the available data in matter of how did the economy grow and what was the investment made in youth and in which fields: health, education, employment, job creation. So you also need to make sure the conclusions that you are making are really supported by the data. And the common mistake here is that you may have something that you think should really be put in policies, but if your findings don't support that, you definitely should not include it, though you think it's something that will be very relevant. So you also need to look at the implications on a wider context of your findings, and particularly for policy and advocacy, whether you are doing research, whether you are doing program implementation or advocacy type of abstracts. And the findings highlight here relate to the primary outcome measure, but you also need to mention and expected findings that you actually probably that came out of your analysis, though you were not expecting them. So here the other common mistake is that when something is negative, as Liz mentioned, or whether it doesn't really align with the common practices, sometimes people tend to ignore them, but we really encourage to share this and probably people may draw many lessons from the failures that will sometimes are ignored to be highlighted in these types of abstracts. Then you also need to be honest as you conclude, and you also should not claim more than what your data are telling you.
Thank you so much, Chris. And now we'll hear again from Liz on some general writing tips for your abstracts.
Hello again. So as we were planning for this webinar, we all just sort of put our heads together and brainstormed some general tips that we think it's helpful for writers to keep in mind as they're developing abstracts. So I'll go over some of those thoughts, and then I'll also share with you some common pitfalls that can result in your abstract not getting selected. So, so we've got some pointers to keep in mind, and then I think some things to watch out for. So I think one important tip is to make sure that you start the abstract development process early enough so that you have time to really think about it, ask for help if you need it, and give yourself time for revision. You know, if you wait till a day before it's due, you're just not going to have the kind of time that you would probably need, want to refine the abstract to make sure it's as good as it can be before you submit. So before you jump into the actual writing, it's really helpful to make sure that you absolutely understand the abstract criteria. So once you've gone to the ICFP website and you've read through the criteria, if there are certain things that don't make sense to you or that you don't quite understand, make sure that you reach out to the conference organizers and ask questions. And you can see that the abstract's email address is provided in this slide. So if you have any questions about what's expected or what the reviewers will be looking for, you can email the organizers to find out more. One thing that I think is really helpful is to review examples of past conference abstracts or other published abstracts, just to get a sense of what does a good abstract look like. I think it's always helpful to work from an example. And then, just follow the ABCs of good abstract writing. So what does that mean? Accuracy, as Chris mentioned a few minutes ago, you want to make sure that everything you're reporting is accurate and correct and factual. Brevity. So there are a lot of different kinds of information you need to include in this relatively short abstract. So how can you make sure to include all the information you need, but also keep it brief and concise? And then finally, clarity. Make sure that in each section of the abstract, the main point that you want to get across or the information that you want to convey is clear. Make sure that somebody who's not an expert in your particular field of study can still understand your abstract. Just a couple more tips. One big one is to try to use simple language. So what does that mean? Avoid jargon and avoid acronyms. I know I've reviewed abstracts and people have used acronyms and I have no idea what those acronyms stand for. And then it's really hard to understand what the abstract is talking about. So even if it's tempting to use acronyms to save space, make sure that you spell out at first mention anything that you'll be abbreviating or using acronyms for later in the abstract. And that even includes things like using FP for family planning. I think it's best to just spell out family planning. So avoid jargon. What does that mean? I think sometimes you can fall into the trap of feeling like using technical language makes the abstract sound smarter. Really, though, it can make it harder for reviewers to understand. So, shorter, simpler words can cut down on your word count and also make the abstract more accessible for your reviewers. So just as an example, rather than the word utilize, use the word use. Rather than the word operationalize, you can use the word do. So look at your abstract, and sometimes it's helpful to have somebody review your abstract who does not work in your field. So a friend of yours or a family member, see if the abstract makes sense to them. If there are things that they don't understand, those might be spots where you can simplify the language a little bit more. Oops, can you go back just another second to the previous abstract? Another quick tip is to just be aware of your grammar. and try to use active voice. I think so often we fall into the trap of using passive voice, where we talk as if something's happening to you rather than you doing something. So an example of active voice is to say, the program served more than 1,200 clients. The program, that's an active voice because the program is the subject and you know what the program is doing. The program is serving clients. An example of making that same statement in passive voice would be saying, more than 1,200 clients were served by the program. So you're talking about what is something that's being done to someone rather than something that is being done. And I think a good tip as far as looking at your grammar and your spelling and watching out for typos is to have somebody else, whether it's a friend or a colleague, review and proofread your abstract for you. If you've been looking at the abstract for a long time, you might not even be able to see certain spelling errors or mistakes, or you know, you might not be able to see ways that you can make the abstract a little bit more clear. So having another person, another pair of eyes on your abstract really can help. So make sure that you build in time for that process when you start your abstract. So we'll just go over a few common reasons that abstracts are often rejected. And we just talked about this a second ago, but poor writing. So if your abstract has a lot of errors and typos, that doesn't look good. So again, make sure to look out for those. I think another common reason abstracts are rejected is if they fail to adhere to the submission criteria. So again, you know, if you have questions about the abstract criteria, make sure you reach out to the organizers or to a colleague to clarify before you start writing. Another reason an abstract might be rejected is if it lacks originality, if it does not add any new information to the conversation. So again, make sure as you're writing, you're really emphasizing what new or different insights or information is your research or is your program providing for the field. I think a big pitfall is if you include misleading or empty statements. So if you're trying to sort of make more of your results than is really there, or if you're inaccurately describing your methods, or sort of making statements that aren't backed up by the data, that can be a problem. Similarly, if you just don't have enough new or specific information, if your abstract is so general that you might as well be talking about anything, that could be challenging. So again, make sure that you're providing specific contextual information, specific results. And then I think another thing to watch out for is just, the conference has a number of tracks, a number of themes. Make sure that your abstract really ties in clearly to one of those conference themes. If the abstract does not seem relevant to the main themes of the conference, it's less likely to be accepted. So just a few more things to look out for. And this is, sort of looking at each section of the abstract, pitfalls that can occur within these sections of the abstract. So if your objective or your main question or hypothesis is just not clear, if the reviewers aren't clear about what you're trying to answer with your research or your program, or what you're trying to address, that can be a problem. Again, if you've used either an unclear methodology or an inappropriate methodology, or you just haven't really described the methodology that you've used, that can result in a rejection. Similarly with results, if you're missing key information from your results, if you haven't fleshed out the implications or tied the implications of your results back to the significance on the main question, that can be a problem. Sometimes it just happens that, you've begun a study or you've begun a program and it's really promising, but there just aren't enough results to really report any findings yet. So I think if you have insufficient information to share at the time you're submitting the abstract, that could result in a rejected abstract. And finally, if it's just not clear what the linkages are among the different sections of the abstract. So if the background you've provided doesn't clearly tie into the main question, if the results don't answer the main question, if the implications don't really explain what the significance of your program or research is in the context of the background that you've provided or the question that you've asked, then that can be a problem in terms of getting your abstract accepted. So I think, just try to make sure that your abstract is like a little roadmap that leads the reviewers to a similar conclusion that you came to, or to the conclusion that you came to based on your knowledge of the context, your understanding of the problem, your findings, and then the conclusions that you've drawn from those findings.
Thank you so much, Liz. Now we're going to take questions, or rather answer questions. A few of you have submitted questions through the chat window, and we have them here with us. So I think Chris is going to answer these questions.
Yeah, there are questions that are that have been submitted, and I see now Alan is with us. So if there are questions regarding the methodology section, Alan will be here to respond to the questions. And sorry to hear that you had connectivity problems, Alan. So the first question we had was how to participate as a French speaker. So comment faire pour vous suivre en français? I'm not sure if the person who asked the question is still with us, mais je pense qu'on va partager les documents pour comment développer le résumé en français, mais aussi si on pourra avoir assez de gens qui peuvent développer une présentation comme celle-ci pour les gens qui parlent français. Je pense qu'on va essayer de coordonner et puis faire un atelier sur comment développer un résumé en français. Mais si on ne peut pas avoir assez de gens qui peuvent travailler sur la présentation, on va juste partager les liens auxquels vous pouvez trouver tous les documents importants pour développer un résumé en français. On a tous sur nos sites web. Je pense qu'on va partager, et je pense que Caroline aurait partagé ces liens. Mais si il y a des questions qui ne sont pas répondues après avoir consulté ces documents, n'hésitez pas à nous envoyer un email. So the other question is how can young people make concise but catchy abstracts? So I'm not sure whether we have to make the abstracts catchy, because we are trying to have abstracts that are really responding to the question that we've highlighted in the background section and in the really in the introduction and significance section. So we don't necessarily have to make the abstracts catchy. Instead, we need to try to respond to the questions that we actually highlighted in the significance or background section. So the other question is, can we edit our abstracts? Yes, we can. So editing the abstract, once you submit your abstract on the official abstract submission portal, there is a way you can go back and edit your abstract, and the last day to edit your abstract is actually the closure of abstract submission. So that's April 13th, midnight Eastern time. So you can edit your abstracts anytime before that, but after that, you will not be able to edit your abstracts. So how contemporary should be the data source? Alan, I think this question is for you. It's on the methodology section. So if you can unmute yourself and respond to the question.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be able to join with you. The question you said, if I may get it right, you said how contemporary are the data sources, you said?
Should be the data sources.
Well, I would say I think it will vary from different studies, and The time period, again, would vary with the organizers for the respective sections. The sessions that are organized, the agreed upon sessions. So I will not give a specific timeline, but I think if you're looking at data sets, I mean, you wouldn't want to base your abstract on data that was used over 10 years ago. So the recent data or studies that have been carried out, the better, because then you are speaking to issues that are prevailing in the contemporary world. So I would suggest that if you can
maybe I can clarify, because I asked the question. Maybe I can clarify, because when I was inquiring about contemporary data, I was also pointing out on maybe data that would potentially try to criticize maybe demographic health surveys that have already been published that are maybe 5 or 4 years ago. The thing about it is, if you're carrying new data, is then how contemporary should it be, and is it something that maybe can be 2 years, 3 years? At least we can have a measuring indicator, so that it's not too old, but it's something that gives new information to the study.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. Like I mentioned, I mean, you've rightly stated it, that it's better actually to have the most recent. I mean, the study that have occurred or have been done are better off than. I'm not saying that disputes what has already been published, but it would be very good or interesting to know any studies that are coming up. Maybe you're critiquing some of the findings that have been established. And yes, 3 years, 2 years, or even within the time that these calls have been, has been made for the family planning conference. So most recent, I don't think you should go beyond 10 years, 8 years, 5 years. So 3 years, 2 years, yes, that would be okay.
Okay.
Great. So I think what I can add on that is you may sometimes use kind of some old data if, for example, you are trying to compare them with the current data. Because sometimes you can see programs like the family planning programs that were initiated in 1970s, and you want to see actually based on what was done that time, what do we have now and how does it compare, and probably what worked and what did not work. So in that case, you can actually use some of the old data. So I think for some, depending on the context, you may use different sources of data or even different data sets, but the most recent data are, of course, more preferable for either research program or advocacy. Then we had another question on.
We are moving.
Yeah, so where interviews were not
So this, we're here now. What are the key achievements of the organization to date? So I'm trying to fix in some of this. Oh, wait, this is now.
Sorry, guys, I will have to mute you. And I'm going to go through all the questions because we have them all in front of us. And we'll then go through other questions if there are some remaining questions. So the next question is, where interviews were not completed, should we note this or explain our findings? This study interviewed 100 and only 50 responded. Only 30 complete, only 50 responses, only 30 complete responses. Will this dilute the hypothesis? So, okay, the question was not very clear, but I think here what we are trying to understand is you have very low response rate.
Okay, Jean, may I please clarify where it's not very clear? Because this was pegged on the hypothesis discussion, whereby you could actually falsify or make a hypothesis known. So you see, if you're hypothesizing something, then you want to back it up with the responses that were given. So in a case where you interviewed 100 people and you got only 50, and out of the 50, you only got 30 complete responses. Like in the case where you interviewed religious people using and their attitudes on injectables, and in the responses, maybe 30 responses were complete, but 20% started but did not complete. Will this dilute the hypothesis? How would you frame that kind of finding? That was my question.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. And my thoughts on this is that we rarely get 100% response rate. And depending on the type of study you are doing, if you feel like you got probably quite good information saturation in those 30 responses, here you can argue that you actually got quite good responses, because probably even after interviewing 30 people and realize you are not gaining any new information, sometimes people may say, oh, actually, you can even probably stop from there. So I think here you are not trying to conclude whatever is going on in the whole population based on 100 people. So I would encourage actually to just mention it, say we had like an issue with the responses, and our response rate was probably 30%, but this is what we got.
May I add something?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. One of the key things that we really talk about in research is the issue of integrity, and it's good that you raise this question, especially with regard to methodology. So if your response rate was, say, like you mentioned, say 50 or 30%, it's very important that we highlight it and then indicate your findings. Of course, if there are very few people who have responded and you're saying you're testing, say, a hypothesis, even the analysis would depict the same about the findings that you have. So for me, the two key issues here that you need to take note of, issues to do with the response rate being highlighted as is, and then interpret the findings accordingly, or the hypothesis that has been tested. But again, most importantly, is to maintain the issue of integrity.
And I would ask
Chris, over to you.
Mute everyone, like if you are not speaking, really see if you can mute yourself so that others can follow.
Women.
Our next question is, can you show a sample of the method section of a program abstracts? A sample of a method section of a program abstract. Okay, so Mariam just told me that we'll be sending out some examples for those for each type of abstract. Oh yeah, we actually have that. So we share that. So how can we view the abstract submitted of the past conferences? So here there were some discussion, and there were some available abstracts for past conferences that could be Googled. So you could find them if you Google like the different conferences. But we encourage just to use that as an example, because most of the time we have the same reviewers for the abstracts, and to be very negative for anyone if you had like an abstract that looks exactly the same as what was presented last year. And it's also maybe possible that the same reviewer will be the one to review your abstract. So more likely that person can pick it up. But you can always kind of use online research just like to inform yourself. For the ICFP, there are some abstracts that you can access, but you can't access everything, of course, that was submitted, because we are moving on with the new website and the new system. So how is the selection criteria? So we shared the selection criteria at the beginning, but I'm happy to share them again. So the evaluation criteria are these. So we look at the originality, the quality of the abstract, the importance, and the presentation. How clear are your conclusions based on the information that you provide in your background and in your introduction. So basically, these are the 4 criteria. The way they are weighed. It's not that every criterion has 25%. No, it's they are weighed based on the type of abstract. So the scientific subcommittee will decide on how they are going to weigh these 4 criteria, but they don't all have 25%, 25%. So how can other people participate to the conference, in the conference? So I'm not sure what we meant with participation here. Is it like attending? Is it like maybe any type of contribution? Can you clarify the question?
It cannot be. Wait now. Wait. I'm swing.
Okay, so I'll move on to the other question if we are not able to kind of clarify the question. Okay, so how many authors are allowed per abstract? That was the next question. The system can accept as many co-authors as you have on your paper, but most of the time we encourage up to 8, 10, like really maximum. But you can enter, like, so the system allows you to enter anyone who actually worked on the paper you are going to submit the abstract for. So this is also helpful. For example, when you cannot make it to the conference, then you have someone who can present your abstract. So how many pages per abstract? So for each type of abstract, if you spend some time on this, okay, this section. So here, each section has the word count that you have to kind of use for each of the sections. And this is really the maximum. You don't have necessarily to go up to 1,000 words. So each abstract is 1,000 words, but you don't have necessarily to go up to that number.
So this is where we are now.
See why I know.
Sorry, guys. So then we have another question. How many abstracts can I submit? You can submit as many abstracts as you have. So please feel free to submit as many abstracts as you can. So there's no limit number. However, if your abstracts are accepted for presentation, you can only appear up to 2 times. So you will have to make some decisions there once your abstracts have been submitted, because we need to give opportunities for people to present. And of course, there are people who can have even 10 abstracts. So we try to limit the number to 2 abstract presentations. So, for example, if you have individual abstracts, then you'll have 2 opportunities. And if you have one of your abstracts on the preformed panel, then you will appear on the preformed panel and on the individual abstracts. So in that program, you cannot appear more than twice. And this is to provide opportunities for participation for many people who are working in family planning program. And we hope that if you are able to choose your best 2 abstracts, maybe we have shared like the good practices or the good findings that you would want to share with the family planning community. The other question is, can we submit an abstract on a study that is still going on? Yes, we mentioned, as you can see on this slide, the preliminary results can be shared as long as you have some key findings that you'd like to share with the family planning community. And can abstracts be written on case studies? Yeah, we encourage any type of abstract, and whether it's a case study that was kind of based on a research, or was it like a program case study, or was it an advocacy case study? Like wherever it fits, then you will be okay to submit it there. Or whether you want to kind of collaborate with people who have almost the similar case studies. Maybe I'm here envisioning case studies that were done in different countries, they can easily form a very good preformed panel. So in that case, you can also submit it as a preformed panel. Can abstracts be written? Oh yeah, on case study. That's what we just answered. So the other question is, would you be able to share some tips, best practices for the submission of the preformed panel abstracts? So here we, as you also saw on the slide, this slide, you can see we don't really have kind of a very high number of preformed panels. So the idea here, the preformed panels are submitted by organizations that work on similar issues. So sometimes they will choose, or even they will find more useful for participants to kind of bring 4 abstracts up. So you can have a minimum of 2 abstracts and a maximum of 4 abstracts in a preformed panel. So you choose based on how similar your programs or how similar your studies are. And here really the best practices will be the same, or even the structure, the content, the analysis, and how clear, as Liz mentioned, how you have to review, because each of the components of the preformed panel is an abstract on its own. And another thing that I would like to mention is that the conference organizers will also, if there is an individual abstract that was submitted as part of a preformed panel, and they really think it's a very good abstract, they will also go ahead and have that specific abstract presented in case the preformed panel is not selected for presentation. So that's why when you submit your preformed panel, if it's for presentation, each presentation is an abstract on its own. So you have to use the same best practices guidelines to actually make your abstract like the best you can actually produce. So the next question is, I use both qualitative and quantitative methods. So is it necessary to discuss both in detail? Well, if you used a mixed method, I think you also have to kind of discuss whatever you did. So Alan, do you want to speak about this?
The sensitization campaign, sensitization education, sensitization.
Hello?
Yes, Alan.
The question, if I may recall well, is saying that whether one could use quantitative or qualitative method. Is that the question?
So she said, he or she said, I use both qualitative and quantitative methods. So is it necessary to discuss both in detail?
Yes, it would be good to discuss, especially the results with regard to the methods that were used in data collection. Actually, what we usually say is triangulating the results, as in you give the quantitative like findings, and then you also give the qualitative information in relation to the findings, say, giving, say, in-depth understanding of the said or given statistics. So it is very good to use both, and you can also provide or interpret your results in relation to the methods that were used. Since they were used actually in data collection, so yes, he or she should be able to use them, or can go ahead and use both results from both methods that they used in collecting data. Over
Chris,
to you.
this is question from my side. This is Ghulam Yasin from Pakistan. May I repeat the question?
Sure.
Please.
Actually, in my study, I have working on finding the determinants of client certification. So in that, initially for developing the tool, we did the qualitative work, and we did some focus group discussion with the experts, and also determined some key elements for the client certification, and also collected some information, and then developed the initial tool with the local language translation. Then we tested that tool in the field and collected the quantitative data, and finally analyzed that data in a scientific way with the different scientific means, using the SPSS as another alternatives, and finally find the scientifically proved qualitative indicators for the client satisfaction. So I am worried that I have to present both parts, that the qualitative then are doing that part, or a quantitative that was the end result of that study.
Hello? Okay, sorry,
Yes.
don't know. I think you shouldn't worry about that, because once you use these different methods, when you use, say, the mixed method approach, I think it's actually powerful in the validation of the kind of data that you have collected. So when you're using two or more sources, it's a very good approach, because it's kind of a very good technique that helps in the validation and also relates to the findings that you may have for whether you're testing a specific like tool, as you mentioned, and you want to show the different aspects that relate to the findings that you have with regard to your study or what you were testing. Chris?
Yes, thanks, Alan. And another thing that Gulam you may actually consider is if you realize your intervention is actually has two distinct components, you also may choose to produce two different abstracts. Because I can see one qualitative as a formative kind of type of study, and another one that actually you are looking at the outcome, probably the impact or maybe the usability of the tool you are producing.
Okay.
You can also choose to produce two abstracts, and I think that also would be fine. So really depending on like the components in your specific intervention, you may choose to produce more than one abstract.
More than one?
Yeah, more than one.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. This is a very good idea. Let me think about it. I did not really think about in this way to make this study in the two abstracts. So let me think about it. If its contents are really have a much degree that we can develop a two abstracts from that study. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gulam. So the next question is, are you able to edit an abstract after it's accepted? Yes, if it's accepted and you are going to present it, let's say since then you think you got more kind of clearer, like you got clearer data and you want to improve the abstract, then it's already been accepted. Sometimes you are given time really to kind of make sure we have the last version before we actually go for printout. So you can edit it. For example, if you submit preliminary results because that's all you have by April 13, can you update your accepted abstract with final results before the conference? And what about editing authors after an abstract is accepted? So editing authors, of course, you probably may need to notify like the conference organizers, but you also are allowed to actually kind of, is this the person who is going to be the main presenter, or is he going to be just like a participant? So based on your availability, you can always edit up to 1 month before the conference, because that's when we actually have to go for the printing of the whole kind of conference book. So we encourage to have all the edits done really far in advance so that we can have the final version of whatever will be printed. So do young people whose abstracts are selected get preference in the scholarship granting? So here, young people, we define young people as young researchers who are below 35 years of age. So I understand that increases like the number of people who may be part of like that specific group. But in the previous years, there were not many under 30 abstract submitters. So in order like to increase kind of the competitiveness between kind of applicants for scholarships, we decided to increase that number, but also to allow young researchers to also participate at the conference, because we also understand that it's very likely that once you are still under 35, you are really finding your ways around, like around research and program or advocacy programs implementation. All right, so that's all the we had as questions. If there are any other questions on the in the chat, no, we don't have any other questions on the chat room. But if you have any other questions, please pick up, or if you have any comments or any inputs.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm a follow.
Sorry, like
I'm a follow-up from Nigeria.
Okay, Ofor, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm a follow-up Jeremiah from Nigeria, and I want to ask: is there a way we could get access to past abstract? Because I believe it's really going to help us in preparing our own abstract when we're able to get access to past abstract, so that we don't make much more errors. I don't know how possible that would be.
So we are going to share some like sample abstracts for research type, advocacy, and program implementation. So we are going to share those at the end. And the question that I also did not answer is whether young people who get abstracts accepted get preference for scholarships. Yes, but what I made clear is that the way we define young here will be the same as junior researcher for the abstract scholarship. So that's whoever who is under the age of 35. So if you have your abstract accepted and you are under the age of 35, there's a way you actually mention that when you submit your abstract, so we know who will be under 35 and they get preference for scholarships that are available. And there also will be a video contest for, of course, a completely different thing, but there also will be opportunities for video contests for youth who are under 30. I think, Jill, are you on this call so you can give more precise information about that? Okay. So,
Chris, I'm here. It's yeah, it's below the age of 25.
Below 25? Otu. Okay.
Yes, below 25, below 25.
Okay, good, thanks. So for young people who are below 25, they'll be given the opportunity to apply for scholarships based on the video contest. And the call should be out in 15 days or so. Good, so there's another question. If your abstract is accepted, yes, you get preference. Can we submit abstracts of 1 year pilot project? So for program and advocacy kind of type of pilot projects, yes, you can submit those type of abstracts. Was that the question, Ankita?
Okay.
Great.
All right, let's go to the end. All right, everyone, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great also to hear some of your voices today and to have about abstracts for the conference. We wish you all the very best of luck in submitting and putting your abstracts together for the conference. If you have any questions along the way about your abstract, please don't hesitate to email abstracts@fpconference.org to get your question answered. We will be posting this recording on the 120 Under 40 website at 120under40.org/resources, along with the sample abstracts that Chris mentioned. And IYAFP will be distributing those resources as well. So thank you very much to the 120 Under 40 team and the IYAFP team that supported this webinar, and to those who presented today. And thank you to all of you for joining us.